Right. So the foundation. It's we are so fortunate to live in this generation and in this culture. Imagine being born into Saudi Arabia and being raised in the Wahhabi extreme version of Islam. You just don't have the knowledge that we are so fortunate to have in this society and in this generation of how families affect children, of the importance of self-esteem. The foundation of our self-esteem was created in our formative years, particularly in our childhood. People were modeling behavior to us, whatever that behavior was. And we were just on the receiving end as that unit of awareness existing in a physical interface system and trying to figure out how to deal with that, whatever our situation was in our family of origin. Our self-esteem was influenced profoundly by our parents, or whoever took care of us. People enter adulthood with self-esteem that is typically as healthy or as impoverished as the extent to which they were loved and respected or neglected and abused during their formative years. And no matter how low or wounded a person's self-esteem is, it can be improved, healed. And as I have done some counseling work with people exiting Mormonism and other authoritarian cultic religions, it amazes me. It just amazes me how the human spirit, that spark that's right at the center, can endure just so much, and yet it can't be totally extinguished. And there just is that aspect of the self that's just clinging and wants to. It's almost like just a force at the core of our being that is pushing us forward. And forward might be 1 centimeter, and that's all we can handle for today. Or forward might be something much more drastic than that. And that's why the exit from Mormonism process psychologically, because I've talked with over the last 7-8 years hundreds of people exiting Mormonism and reading their posts and emails and what have you. And every experience is so unique. And that uniqueness, at whatever point you are in your process, you really need to, I hope you really honor that. And you recognize where you've been and what you've had to deal with in order to reach the point where you're at. But the journey's not over. The journey involves legitimate suffering. This is a term that I first came across in a recorded lecture by Dr. M. Scott Peck, who is a U.S. psychiatrist and author of The Road Less Traveled. And he passed away, by the way, October last year. But he said that in psychotherapy, people come to a psychologist or a psychiatrist very often because there's been a crisis in their life, a breakdown of a marriage or loss of a job or whatever. And they think that that's their problem and that's all that they need to deal with and address. And that's really stuff that's just right on the surface. And once you start scratching through and addressing that, you get into just, in people's lives, just so much in terms of unresolved feelings and old wounds that the individual wasn't able to acknowledge because maybe they grew up in an environment like Linda told us this morning about infants not being able to cry. That's just horrific. And yet, those adults in that cultic group are somehow, through physical violence, are able to psychologically condition an infant not to cry. That just blew me away. So that process of legitimate suffering involves confronting our fears, becoming aware of our repressed anger, and non-destructively expressing it, if that's something that is coming up for you or you have felt. It came up for me hugely. I was stunned at just how powerful the anger was, because I'm an intense person anyways, and your healing process will be very much a function of your personality. And I had a physician friend of mine tell me, he said, Blair, you need to learn to access your shadow, your dark side, and find a way or ways to non-destructively express it. He was a married man, he had kids, and how he did it is he took his race vehicle and went out to one of the racetracks where he lived, and he would race at just as fast as he possibly could around the track, just putting his life right on the edge, pushing the envelope. It was very much a function of his personality. That was just his way of expressing that aspect of himself. But one of the huge problems with Mormonism and its psychological effects is that it conditions, it programs people to split off and repress all aspects of their humanity that are not allowed to exist as a faithful Mormon. And so we heard about the stake presidents and the bishops who can sexually use their daughters on a Saturday night and then be conducting a meeting the next morning. And how is that possible? Through this splitting off and repressing well, in that case it would be an aspect of their sexuality. And what mental health professionals know is that things that are split off and repressed, and particularly if the repression goes on for a long time, is that it takes a dark, there's a darkness that develops essentially around it, a dysfunction, a serious dysfunction. So something that sexuality, sexual expression, sexual exploration, which in a normal, healthy individual is an organic process that happens during adolescence and into young adulthood and beyond. And it happens organically, but when there are psychological barriers that are put in place that essentially say to the individual, you're not allowed to be sexual. You're not allowed to even think a single sexual thought, because if you do, you will make yourself spiritually impure. And anything that is spiritually impure, filthy, cannot live with Heavenly Father, with Jesus Christ, with your faithful, righteous LDS family members in the highest level of the celestial kingdom. And so you're not allowed to be aware of that aspect of yourself. Because if you were, the ultimate consequence of that is your eternal suffering. That's what the theology is saying to you. And so for reasons of your spiritual survival, you cannot be aware of that aspect of yourself. It cannot exist. But it does exist because you're human. So how can it possibly exist and not exist? You have to split it off and repress it. And mental health professionals, when they work with pedophiles, when they work with rapists, when they work with people who have histories of physical abuse, they're not just dealing with sinful behavior, because behavior is just a symptom. It's just a manifestation of something else, something much, much deeper that needs to be addressed. So bear that in mind, and you might want to, if you still feel that Mormonism is negatively affecting yourself, your life, you might want to go home and just start writing out what aspects of my humanity did Mormonism, as I experienced it, as you experienced it in your family of origin, in your situation growing up, because it's going to be unique, as I said before, for all of us. But what were those messages that I received, that you received? What aspect of my humanity, what aspects of my humanity were not allowed to exist? because there's tremendous healing. The healing process, which I'll talk about later, basically boils down to